everyone, and welcome to the CIA's monthly report. I'm Julia, and I'm joined Agent 12, Julia, and joined with Agent I in Ireland again. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, everybody.
And we're going to have a look at not so much, well, the month ahead, but from the beginning of Leo, because we actually also have a monthly webinar from, the first of the month to the end of the month on our CIA membership. So this is just a little bit of an introduction with different agents to have a look at what's going on. So we're looking generally from July the 23rd to August the 23rd. It's been quite a month, July.
It has absolutely been, and we'll get into that around the Uranian connection for what's been going on this last month.
Yeah, because some of the aspects are, well, they've been coming and going, to do with the retrograde of Mars and so forth. And it's been such a full-on, well, just in the last week, as we're taping this, the attempted coup in Turkey, the massacre again in southern France, and just a whole lot of really unsettled, awful, violent type of energies, which...
Yes, and Mars for this last month has been pretty much stationed in connection to Uranus by quincunx, and we've seen that in the football in Europe, in France, as well as the British exit and all the political stuff that's going on around the world, be it in Venezuela or be it in England as well.
Yes, that's right. So it's global. It's happening somehow everywhere, and Mars is the light in the sky at the moment, with Saturn very, very prominent in the beginning stars of the constellation of Scorpio. So, everyone can see it, and it seems much more potent when it really is visible out there in the sky. But as we start the month of Leo, I remember we did a session with Kai Pacha. A lot of people know Kai Pacha. He's our Agent 50 a few years ago, and we were going to start this monthly report. And so every month I was going to ask a different agent, if Leo had a superpower, what would it be? So I'm asking you now.
Confidence.
Confidence, okay.
Sense of absolute determination, of confidence and belief in self, that one is not only just omnipotent, but really strongly attuned to one's own inner light. That's in an unwavering manner, which means that willpower to accomplish and create would be what I would consider to be a little bit of a superpower.
Right. So everyone's got it. Yeah, you've got to have it from the core, from the solar plexus. Leo is ruled by the sun. So the sun, the bright light, the shining light in the solar system and in our astrology charts is really is the highlight of strengthening ourselves. So Leo time.
Yes, and where Leo falls in your own chart describes where you're able to anchor your own inner spirit and becoming more solid within your own belief system about who you are, your sense of confidence in whom you are becoming, whether that falls as a rising sign on the midheaven. The house that it falls in your own natal chart gives an indication of what arena over your lifetime you're developing a desire to dive into your own inner numinosity, to really anchor your own spirit and to bring yourself eventually out into the world after a period of gestation, because Leo is a mixture of two different states. There are three modes: cardinal, fixed, and mutable, which describe three ways in which energy interacts with our consciousness: outwardly, inwardly, and spirally or changeably. Fixed is inward. And then four different elemental states or forms of consciousness: spirit, practicality, breath, and emotion. And fire is a spirit energy, so fixed fire, anchoring the spirit within.
Yeah, that's well said. I see the Aries as a fire wand, like a wand, a simple flame, but it's a start one. I see Leo as the flame of a campfire, or a warm hearth fire at home where people, the family or friends gather for the expression of self, for comfort, for celebration. And then I see the Sagittarius fire, which we've got Saturn in Sagittarius, as the bushfire, where it's like the idea that goes much further than your own self and goes, you know, way beyond as a philosophy or a religion, or, you know, that groups a bigger picture together. So we're firing up this month, that's for sure, because as we start the month as well, we've got a few other planets in Leo, Mercury and Venus.
And what's exciting about Mercury and Venus is that if we go out and we look up at the sky, which is what astrologers sometimes are prone not to do, is to remember we're living in a living, breathing cosmos, and not just through our computer screens. And if we look west, just literally after sunset, it's very difficult to see Mercury, because Mercury very rarely gets way above the sun to see. But just around sunset, we're going to see just above the sun Mercury and Venus. And Venus will progressively, over the course of the rest of 2016, get higher in the evening sky, because they're now both evening stars rather than morning stars.
Yes.
This is part of the work that Julia has been writing extensively about on the site. There's a lot of articles that you can read more technicality around. But what's exciting about that is the evening stage of a cycle is the maturing stage. And it's, I think, given what is going on, is good if we can find a more mature or more adult value system, as opposed to this Amazonian, youthful, reactive value system that we've seen through the latter part of 2015 and the whole way through 2016.
Yeah, so you think we'll get a bit more serious in this second half of the year? Let's hope.
It's more serious, measured, and hopefully a bit more tempered with our responses when our buttons have been pushed around what we believe our values are, and rather than that rhetoric of that, let's manipulate the youth to get them incised, and let's get them out there in reactive mode. That sense of, hey, let's find another center here, and let's look and reflect a bit more before we react.
Yeah, it's been so reactive, hasn't it? So Venus coming out as the evening star. Not only is it a beautiful sight, and as you said, gets higher in the sky every night, and that's up until January next year. So it's quite a long cycle of going up. Right?
Yes.
So we start the month like looking at that. And for anyone that doesn't, like in your own astrology chart, you can say everyone's got evening stars and morning stars. So the way to find out, folks, is that if your sun, whatever's before the sun in the zodiac, like if there was some planets down here in this fourth area, they would be rising before the sun. And as you can see, if the sun was setting, these two are high above. So it's an easy way to look at an astrology chart and see what was rising in the morning sky or the evening sky when you were born.
So I was just going to say, there's one very simple way then of interpreting that for those who are new to this form of astrology, phasal astrology, is a morning star is more yang, an evening star more yin.
Yes.
And a yang expression is more proactive and outward. And a yin expression is more inward and reflective.
Yeah, and there's a lot more work that has been done with Venus phases by various astrologers, and well, let's move into the new moon, because that's coming up a few days later. But just remembering what's in our hearts here is important for this time of Leo. It's very much about what makes our hearts tick.
Absolutely. And the new moon, which takes place on the 2nd of August into the 3rd, if it's in the southern hemisphere, I think, is basically connected quite strongly to 3 immediate planetary archetypes. The first one is Saturn, the second is Chiron, and the third is Neptune. And that we've been experiencing on and off through this year a tense dynamic where our ideals and our faith and our sense of reality have all been really clashed and really tested and squeezed and pulled all over the place. And you're seeing people going around with a certain feeling of existential exhaustion and a feeling like, particularly for people who have been doing a lot of conscious work and healing work, getting kind of frustrated at the pithiness to which people are responding as a herd, as opposed to, you know, taking a time back and looking at how are my own inner enemies of my own soul and my fear body, how am I releasing that, excuse me, or am I just projecting this out into the world, you know, as a state of tension? And so this new moon, which is getting us to look at our own inner belief system and our own confidence around our reality. And does our reality, are we living our reality? Are we living within some sort of colonized mind where we've been dumbed down and told this is what consensus reality is? So it's a very much, the Leo bit is very much an interpersonal guise of what's my spirit? Like what's mine? Not what I've been taught to believe, not what, you know, I've been taught to become in the world. What am I? And how can I live that when the world around me seems to be going all at sea and dissolving? And the Chironic energy is more that in-between state of trying to spot a woundedness around ego. And am I reacting in my wounded ego when somebody else is making a strong comment about me or something I don't believe in? Do I react, or do I take a step back and just say, now hang on a second here. My pathway within this time is not to react, but to really look and explore what's the underlying reason why this reaction is coming up. Like, why am I so feel so emotionally intense about this? Because, you know, part of the healing framework is when you feel really emotionally reactive about something, it's because you're in bondage to the essence of what that pattern means, which is a Saturn piece. Because in the philosophy of astrology, Saturn means how we seek to limit, whether ourselves in a constructive way, like discipline, or in a less constructive way in terms of the fear body. And so I feel that one simple messages of this new moon is to take a step back and inwards, to look at your own inner confidence when the world around seems to be swirling in a chaotic haze of dissidence and breakdown and revolution and deconstruction, which has been pretty much, Julia, I think you'd agree, the theme of 2016.
Yes, absolutely. And that every 2-year retrograde transit of Mars and in Scorpio this time too. So I think that, you know, what you're talking about is a bubbling in, you know, from inside and what's kind of creeping up and out. And, you know, if it hasn't been released, it's coming out like in not very nice ways, in so many ways as well. The interesting thing about, I have to tell you a little story about 11 degrees of Leo. When I was in New Orleans at a conference, astrology conference, and you might have heard this before, and some of the agents would know this already, but what Caroline Casey said to me was that, or she said it in a lecture, so it wasn't just to me, but I was sitting there going, oh my gosh, this is so interesting. She worked in Washington, D.C., and a lot of her clients were like private investigators, or even worked for the CIA or undercover agents, something like that. And she said what she found, and I can't remember the reason why she told us in the lecture this, but that 11 degrees of Leo was a really common degree for all these agents, right? And so, oh, hang on, we've got our, we have our Mercury at 11 degrees of Leo. So anyway, it's about waking everyone up again as well.
Well, it kind of suggests for us as an agency, the replenishment and the replenishment and renewal of our ability to communicate in an impassioned way, to challenge our readers not to look so much in the external world, but to develop their own inner psychospiritual process. Because I suppose the quality of the experience that each of us will have during this time is primarily based upon our own expertise in navigation and how we choose to use a rudder. And what we're trying to do as an agency, as a group, as a fellowship, is to move away from the astrology of causes into the, you know, this astrology of signs, and looking within in terms of not just what does it mean for me, but how can I best raise my vibrational state when understand the energetics of what is
What's going on?
moving
Yeah.
in my field,
Mm.
so that I can move forward. Because after the new moon on the 2nd, the next, incisive journey that we have is the peaking of an ongoing cycle between Saturn and Uranus, which, it doesn't come into a perfect exact 000 aspect, but it reaches 19 minutes of arc, which is the closest connection that these two archetypes have had since it started on the 3rd of December 2014 to the 22nd of October last year, 2015. And really, I just think that what we've been witnessing and experiencing has been a lot of this strain around questioning rules and expectations and obligations. And the key to maintaining a stability at this time is acknowledging that we have to review the areas of life seeking out a routine that are monotonous and questioning the underlying core belief systems. Because I think a lot of people who have dived into astrology would recognize that freedom, what is that? Is freedom really a quality that we can master for ourselves, or is freedom something that we live in democratically or non-democratically? And because this is a Leo month, the question is, what is the freedom within as opposed to the freedom without?
Yeah.
And that's going to be a theme that we'll see quite significantly through this month ahead.
Yeah, that's right. Take responsibility for your own freedom.
Pretty much.
That's right. So the Saturn Uranus, and that's going to be a real signature of 2017, isn't it? As an aspect or a trine.
It is, and the difference, I think, energetically between the trine and what's called the trioctile or sesqui-square is the trine gives an opportunity to release something and to let it flow. That doesn't necessarily mean positivity in a smooth manner, but it releases the tension and you get to see it. Whereas with a trioctile, there's an element of being aware of the tension outside of oneself, looking at the tension within, being irritated by it and trying to do a modulation. But because there's a tension, there's an element of, I can really try to control something or try to control something, whereas the trine is like, I don't control it, it's just being released. So if we get, as a society or as an individual, our understanding of what does our own sense of freedom, and are we living within a routine or system that is free, by the time the trine comes along, it'll make for a very interesting release of stress and tension, which could, depending
be
on the
more
awareness.
wild than now.
Exactly, it could very much so be.
Yeah, I can
it's
see
a really
that.
critical time.
Gosh, what I was thinking about as well, and this helps some people understand more about the archetype of Saturn and Uranus, is as rulers, or, Capricorn is ruled by Saturn and Aquarius is ruled by Uranus in the modern world, but in the more traditional sense, Saturn rules both Aquarius and Capricorn. And when we think about Capricorn being the structure that is, what's already been established and so forth, and Aquarius all about the new ideal, we're on this cut, we're between that all the time now with Pluto in Capricorn, and just it's almost like everywhere you look, and we know that we're in that transition point of, and some of us would hope that it was happening quicker than not. But I wrote something similar to this the other day, like if we can not fear the crumbling, and allow it to happen for what needs to fall to get away. But I think a lot of people are quite scared about not knowing what comes next.
And it's also because the heaviest aspected point in the heavens through the summer so far has been Uranus. It continues in the Leo month ahead, because it just, for those who are interested in the student aspect of astrology, if you look at the closest aspects that the planets make to each other, the tightest ones on a day-to-day basis, you get a general feel of what is the main archetype manifesting on a day-to-day basis. And if one was to do that, Uranus comes up successively day after day as being very heavily aspected. And the Uranian archetype is that archetype to release ourselves. It comes, it's like a fourth to fifth dimensional state where we're released from form, we're released from the political system, the social system, the relationship system, and we're questioning what comes after that, if anything, where we're kind of really connected to a kind of a deeper source consciousness, but yet at the same time we live within Saturn's realms, because Saturn, it represents that last archetype that's visible with the naked eye before we go into the need for scrying or technology to be able to sense something else. So that feeling of, as you've just said, Julia, discombobulation, like I don't know what to do, what's coming next, because I can't, there's no limitations, but I want limits, but I don't want limits, but I want limits, but I don't want limits.
I want to expand, I don't want to expand. Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah. And that tension is really huge, as we're this paradox of trying to preserve and maintain this established order against letting it all go, which is exacerbated on the 12th of August when Jupiter reaches Uranus by quincunx. And whilst that comes up at 0 Aries on the 8th of June 2010, this Jupiter-Uranus quincunx has been going on since the 5th of November of 2015, and then the 6th of March of this year, and it peaks 12th, 13th of August at 24 of Virgo stroke Aries. So check out the 24 degrees pieces, to see what happens for their own chart. But really, it's just more an exaggeration. Like Jupiter's nature is to exaggerate or to expand upon the principle it connects in with. And we always use the faster moving planet as the tone to the aspect rather than the slower moving planet. So Jupiter is helping to enlarge the Uranian piece. And I just have one comment for people to maybe think of is, do you walk what it is that you believe, or have you created a beautiful ideology that sits atop a marvelous tower, overseeing at a distance everything, but in reality, do your actions match the depth of inspiration? Yes. Are you truly or struggling with a mind colonized by rules? That's really what I would think to summarize that would be. And how do you feel yourself, Julia, about that extra push that's coming in early August?
It's a real definitive kind of push to walk your talk, as we say. Like you can't muck around, you can't pretend to yourself that you're doing something when you're not. It's got to be really real, Jupiter in Virgo, and very aware of what your actions are all the time, what your beliefs are, because it's Jupiter we're talking here. So, at the core of what we believe we are is exactly what we are.
It's really interesting because you were saying that Mars moves out of bounds. During the month, Mars just moves out of bounds, and that will be a fascinating exercise for students of astrology to watch. What does this mean?
Well, I'll go through that a little bit now. So like in this new moon chart, we can see that Mars is back, retracing steps of its retrograde, and around 1 degree of Sagittarius was its opposition point, the exact opposition point to the Sun when it was at the peak of retrograde back at mid-May or end of May. Anyway, so if we kind of look back at, I'll take you on a bit of journey to Mars retrograde loops, and we've done a lot more work with this on the monthly webinar that we have for others that want to know more. But yes, Mars is going to move out of bounds on the 10th of August. At the same time, as you were just saying, Uranus and Saturn moves direct, and Mars moves, and Uranus moves retrograde. Sorry, if we come back here, Saturn's going to be moving direct after this new moon, and Uranus is going to be moving retrograde. So at the same, they're kind of shifting motion in within a few days of each other. So bringing that archetype in really strong. And if we remember when Mars did go retrograde, it was actually conjunct Saturn, and Antares is the star, another red star that is connected to that part of the sky in Sagittarius. So we have Mars returning to this position that it did go retrograde in a very potent way, but also because it begins to move out of bounds. And I'll let you know what that is by just explaining a bit about his cycle. Hopefully you can see this mandala behind here. But if we look at Mars retrograde loops, this circle represents the zodiac. So Mars retrograde loops happen every 2 years, and in the timing of 15 years, it's made 8 loops. Mars has a 15-year cycle, although that's not exactly all the time. Sometimes it moves a little bit to 16 and even 17 years, and sometimes it's usually about 15. So this is the last loop that we can see that happened at peaking at 0 degrees or 1 degrees of Sagittarius, okay? And the second loop happens in the next part of the sky, and it's going to start at 0 or 9 degrees of Aquarius and peak around the beginning of Aquarius and go back into Capricorn. So it's, you know, it's the next sign across. So it's just something to keep in mind when we look at, you know, the potency of one retrograde planet, especially like Mars. When's it happening next? And then this graph just shows the dates of the cycle. The current Mars Sun cycle started at 23 degrees of Gemini last May. It peaked, as I said, at 1 degree Sagittarius just this May been. And the new cycle starts when they come together again, the Sun and Mars, at 4 degrees of Leo, and then the next retrograde peaks at 4 degrees Aquarius in July 2018. Now, the thing about Mars or any planet, for it to what we call move out of bounds, is when they are in the part of the sky that is bounded by where the sun reaches most northern declination, so the signs of Capricorn, southern declination Capricorn and northern declination Cancer. As we know, the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn depict those two sun points. This is just a close-up of, I know you're not going to see this all too well, and I'm going to go more into this on our monthly webinar, but if you can see the gold kind of line here, that's the sun line. So it shows that in June it was up here, and coming September, it's going to be midway, and by December it will be down here again, okay, at southern declination when Australia has summer, okay, the sun's down here. Now, as we know, Mars is now in Sagittarius, okay? And when it reaches 23 degrees declination, or 23.5, it's what we call moves out of bounds. So it's around here somewhere. And by September the 24th, 2016, it's going to be about 26, 27 degrees declination south, okay? And it's going to be in the sign of Capricorn. So also relating to that peak point. And then if you follow the red line, it comes down again and reaches another out of bounds area 2 years later in September 2018. Now, what becomes interesting when you talk about a release point, like as though, you know, the world's gone crazy. If we look at the Mars declination cycle, we get a bit of more of an idea of perhaps what's going on. But here you can see it's up close, okay? And the declination line is about here, where the sun goes, okay? This is the gold point there. Anyway, as we can see, the important thing with Mars is that back in 2001, on September the 11th, we can see that Mars was out of bounds by a huge declination, and that was 15 years ago. So there's a cycle that Mars is in, and we get that again if I go back to the other one, in 2 years' time as well. So I can kind of see that this real volatile period is upon us now, and perhaps for the next 2 years.
And if we take it from a psycho-spiritual perspective, what it means is that Mars is liberated, so its energetic state has no boundaries to hold it back in.
That's right.
Now, consciousness of us as a tribe, as a community, is such that we don't see Mars in the way that we have done for 7,500 years, which is basically war and strife and reaction. But we're seeing that we're able to bring through spirit into manifestation, to make things happen, to really shake things up and to move things quite quickly. Because prior to 2001, we had the Saturn-Uranus connection in 2000, with Saturn and Neptune through 2001. And then Mars was releasing all of that tension that was going on to give it free expression, which unfortunately in a global context, manifested with actually some of the structures that we live within in Western society being implemented post 2001. And we're seeing the same sort of thing with a lot of the deconstruction, whether it's of Europe, whether we're seeing the fall of America in its current structure as it rose back, when Pluto was last in Capricorn in the 18th century, whether we're seeing it with what's happening in Turkey, in Venezuela, in other countries, that the system is just more fragile. We're going to get a glimpse of what that means in terms of where we are as a society with Mars out of bounds, which is exciting in, as you say, this month coming with the preparation for 2 years' time.
When you look at the declination, it's like there's still more of a release, and as you said, a release point out of bounds. It says it all, doesn't it? It's like no containment. So for your own lives, it could indicate a bit more of a stepping out beyond what your comfort zone was, and so forth as well. In order to get things done. I had an interesting comment today about someone being too scared to open the door. It was actually to your Venus article, too scared to open the door because they know from that point things are going to change. And so, yes, we all have different ways of or the way we open the door. Some of us are much more gung-ho and let's go, let's see what happens, and others are much more fearful for various reasons about going into new ventures, just changing their lives accordingly. But it does have to happen eventually, doesn't it?
Well, the one inevitable in life is change.
Yes, that's right. So this is that Mars Uranus quincunx, and then coming up to the Saturn, or the 135-degree angle, but without the challenges, we don't make the changes. So, we always look at the astrology to help us with the challenges, to help us understand the challenges, and so therefore we can get better at changing them as well. So now this is the full moon on the 18th of August, and as we can see, all those things that we were talking about are right there. The Saturn Uranus. In square aspect, the Mars coming up to Saturn, as we've just talked about, and a full moon in Aquarius now. Okay, so again, bringing in that Aquarian ideal of what are we fighting for? What is this all about, and so forth.
Back to the seed moment, because full moons always bring us back to the parent seed, which is the new moon back when it was in Aquarius earlier on at the start of this year, back in January. And all that's happening there is, am I clear about what my thinking is? That's it. My inner spirit, fixed fire, is now being, given an illumination by what are my own thoughts and ideas, not the ideas and thoughts that have been conditioned by the world, the education system, the parents, partner, your kids, etc. What are my thoughts? Not what my thoughts are having been conditioned to think that way, but what are really my thoughts. And so we'll see that tension. We'll see it is either being an illumination time or a tension time, as you get some people imposing their beliefs on the world and other people kind of really taking a step back to really look at.
Well, that's right. We've all got the right to push our ideals forward and so forth, and that's exactly what's happening as well. And look, it's interesting that Saturn is squaring the nodes at during this month as well, so that's pretty potent as well. And significant planets at these turning points, as we say, squaring the nodes, are really balancing up the past and the future, and what where we are right now and what we need to do. So yeah, it is hard to think about the bigger picture all the time, because we all have to look after ourselves, coming back to the Leo Aquarius type of ideal.
And yet, isn't it not fair to say that part of the Aquarian ideal is by looking after ourselves and straightening our own house, we actually create the looking after the world and the straightening of the house of the world as well, because what is within is mirrored in the world without. And the world without mirrors the world that we've created from within,
Yeah.
which is
the constant feedback loop, that is happening as well. So yeah, and so Jupiter will be opposite Chiron, which we had earlier in February, I think, because Jupiter's retracing his retrograde steps as well and going forward. By next month, we'll be talking about Jupiter in Libra, but we'll leave that till next time because that's going to happen before we know it.
I think it's keeping the hand firmly on the rudder as the stream is meanders and bubbles and cascades through, some turbulent water for a little bit. But that turbulent water, as you beautifully said, Julia, is necessary because turbulence creates awareness, that creates options, that creates dynamism, that creates choice, that creates change, and then it gets into a calmer space. And then it bubbles up, and then calmer.
Okay. It's not going to, if there's a consciousness that is around that is wanting to change the world, then yes, there's going to be more bubbling up. And we're in a way, it seems like we're just at the beginning of that, and so much more to go. But we can't fear the change, otherwise we're not going to get anywhere. And really believing that can be done is, I've always said that, if we don't believe it, it won't happen, and we'll be just swimming in the endless turmoil. So again, yes, focus on yourself, your own happiness, because the more that you can be fulfilled, heart-filled, love-filled, then the world around you is going to be like that as well. So that's at the core. So look, we'll finish up, Andrew, because we could go on for hours. But look, something that I did the other day doing a talk was that we've always got to be reminded of the consciousness that we are as a collective, as we are as an individual, and why we're looking at the sky. Why we're following astrology. How are we beaming that down to here? And, as CIA agents, we're beaming that to help ourselves understand what's going on. We're wanting to, get, as you were saying also, the purpose is to involve more people into astrology and cosmic cycles and knowing their own cosmic cycles. Like if I'm talking about Mars, everyone should be looking 2 years back and 15 years back from any point of a Mars cycle to understand it, for example. And you be the consciousness that directs your astrology. I'll say that to everyone. So I prefer to open them up to wanting to know more. To finish up, there's a lot more information that comes through the CIA with our membership program. So I hope that some of you consider joining that, because we don't have a Patreon account or we do have a donate button, or we don't have, this is our GoFund the CIA project, is to join our membership program. So we really encourage those that want to learn. There's some great things on there. So, and a monthly webinar. I'll finish up with this picture of a fractal, because I always like to tell people that astrology is like living at on the edge of chaos, because we're always looking at the patterns in the skies at any particular time. We're looking at patterns of the past that have repeated, that have told us something about the times now. And that's the fractal nature of astrology, in the sense that it's a pattern that is repeating, but it's forever be able to change at certain points. So a new pattern begins, a new pattern starts to sort of, as they call, bifurcate in a different way. And that's about being at the creative edge of chaos, as agents should know. So anyway, it's just a very creative and insightful way to leave you all with that. So thanks for joining us, Andrew, from the other side of the world.
Absolutely.
And
everybody, we will talk again. We've got a lot of information coming up this next month, so enjoy what is the labor of love of the agents, and you and I, or you and I will speak again for everybody in a month's time.
Fantastic. Thanks for being here, Andrew, and have a good month of Leo, everyone, yourself. So, and we'll see you online soon.